The retired war medic was alone, on New Year's Eve. Then a dragon mother knocked on his door. The door of my cabin shook so hard I thought it would break off its hinges. I grabbed my sidearm before I even stood up. 7 years away from the front line had not erased that reflex, and in that first second, with the wind screaming outside and the fire dying in the stove, I was sure someone was trying to break in. I was wrong. It was worse than that, and better than that, at the same time. My name is Daniel Foss. I used to be a combat medic, the kind who runs toward explosions while everyone else runs away. I served 4 years on the border of Varashi territory, patching up soldiers who had been torn open by shrapnel, burns, and worse things I try not to remember. When the war ended, I moved to the edge of Cauldron Province, as far from other people as I could get, because I wanted silence. I wanted a New Year's Eve with nobody pounding on my door. That wish did not last. The pounding came again, 3 heavy strikes that rattled the windows. Then a voice came through the wood, low and rough, cracking like stone under pressure. It was not a human voice. It was Varashi, one of the giant winged people the human soldiers used to call dragons, because of their scales, their wings, and the fire they could breathe when they were angry enough to use it. Since the war ended, no Varashi had ever come near my cabin. The armistice line ran 2 hours north of here. If one of them had crossed it and flown straight to my door, something had gone very wrong. I opened the door with the gun still loose in my hand, and I looked up into a pair of amber eyes set in a face taller than my doorframe. She had to duck to fit into the frame at all. Her wings were pulled in tight against her back, and her claws were shaking. In her arms, wrapped in a torn strip of her own flight cloak, she carried something small. "Human," she said, forcing the word out like it hurt her throat. "You were a battlefield healer. I can still smell old blood in this house. I need you to be that man again tonight." I looked past her and saw a trail in the snow, dark red under the moonlight, stretching back toward the tree line. She had run the whole way here with something dying in her arms. "Get inside," I said. "Put her on the table, now." She did not question me. She stepped through the door, folding her wings to fit, and set the bundle down on my kitchen table. When she pulled back the cloak, I saw a Varashi hatchling, small compared to her mother, maybe the size of a large dog, with soft gold scales that had not yet hardened into armor. One wing bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. Along her side was a deep wound, torn open, packed with dirt and blood. I knew that kind of wound. I had seen it 100 times during the war. It was not a fresh injury from claws or teeth. It was shrapnel, the kind left behind by old bombs that never stopped killing long after the fighting ended. The forests near this border were full of them, buried under snow, waiting. "Why here?" I asked, already pulling my old trauma kit off the shelf where it had gathered dust for 3 years. "Your healers are not far. Why bring her to a human?" "Because my healers are 2 hours south, and she does not have 2 hours," the mother said. Her claws hovered over her child, too large and too sharp to do the delicate work that was needed. And because 4 years ago, on Alcuris Ridge, a human medic pulled a wounded Varashi soldier out of a collapsed bunker, while shells were still falling. He should have let him die. Every rule of that war said he should have let him die. He did not. My hands stopped moving for half a second. I remembered that night. I remembered the mud, the screaming, the weight of a Varashi soldier twice my size as I dragged him across open ground, while the sky burned above us. "His name was Dren," I said quietly. "I never learned if he survived." "He is my mate," she said. "I have spent 4 years trying to learn the name of the man who saved him. Tonight, I did not come here to thank you. I came here because I remembered that you exist, and because my daughter is dying, and because I had nowhere else to go." There was no time to sit with that. I turned back to the hatchling and began working, and the moment my hands touched her, everything else in the room disappeared. The countdown clock on my old radio kept ticking somewhere behind me, marking the last minutes of the year, but I did not hear it anymore. The wound was deep, and it was bleeding fast. I packed it with clean cloth to slow the bleeding, then reached for the tools I needed to find the metal still buried inside her. Varashi anatomy is close enough to human anatomy in some ways, and completely different in others. I had studied it during the war, enough to keep a soldier alive on a battlefield, but never enough to call myself an expert. I was guessing at parts of this, and I knew it, and I could not let that fear show on my face, because the mother was watching every move I made. "Talk to her," I said, without looking up. "Keep her awake, keep her calm. I need her still." The mother began to sing. It was low at first, broken, her voice catching on every other note. Then it steadied into something that sounded like a lullaby, ancient and simple, the kind of song built to calm a frightened child, no matter what language it was sung in. I worked inside that sound, cutting carefully, clearing dirt from the wound, searching with my fingers for the piece of metal I knew was in there somewhere. I found it faster than I expected, a jagged shard no bigger than my thumb, buried close to something that looked like a major vessel. My hand did not shake. I would not let it shake. I closed my fingers around the metal and pulled it free in one motion, and the hatchling let out a sound that broke something in my chest, half pain and half surprise, and then she went quiet again. "Is she gone?" the mother asked, her voice suddenly sharp with fear. "No," I said. "She fainted. That is good. It means her body stopped fighting the pain long enough to rest." I worked fast after that, cleaning the wound properly, stopping the bleeding with everything my kit had to offer, and finally closing it as well as I could manage. The wing was a harder problem. It was bent at an angle. Wings are not supposed to bend, and I had no diagram, no manual, nothing to tell me exactly how a Varashi wing was supposed to sit once it healed. I did what I knew from treating broken limbs in general. I set the bone as straight as I could, splinted it with strips of wood from my own firewood pile, and wrapped it tight. "She will keep the wing," I said, sitting back at last. My hands were shaking now that they did not need to be steady anymore. "It will not sit perfectly straight. She may fly a little crooked for the rest of her life, but she will fly." The mother made a sound I had no word for, somewhere between a sob and a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in her chest. She sank down onto the floor of my small cabin, wings and all, folding herself as small as a creature her size could possibly fold, and she stared at her daughter's slow, steady breathing, like she could not quite believe it was real. Outside, the storm had not stopped. Snow beat against the window in waves, and somewhere far off I heard the faint pop of colony fireworks marking midnight, the new year beginning without either of us paying it any attention. "You saved her," the mother said finally. "We saved her," I said. "Your voice kept her calm enough for me to work. If she had been thrashing, I could not have gotten that metal out clean." She looked at me for a long moment, her amber eyes studying my face the way a soldier studies unfamiliar ground, searching for danger and finding none. "During the war," she said, "I was told humans were small and weak and driven by fear. I believed it, because I had reason to believe it. Tonight, you opened your door to a stranger twice your size, from the people you fought for 4 years, and you did not hesitate." "I did hesitate," I admitted. "For about half a second, then I saw what you were carrying, and there was nothing left to think about." She looked down at her daughter again, then reached out one clawed hand, careful and slow, and rested it gently on the hatchling's uninjured side. "Her name is Vesa," she said. "I am Merrick." "Daniel," I said, "though it sounds like you already knew that, in a roundabout way." Merrick almost laughed, a rough sound that shook her whole chest. I knew there was a medic on Alcurus Ridge who pulled Dren from the wreckage. I did not know his name until this moment. I have carried the memory of a stranger's kindness for 4 years without a name to put to it. Tonight, I finally have one. I got up slowly, my knees stiff from crouching over the table for so long, and I put more wood on the stove. The cabin had gone cold while I worked, and now that the emergency had passed, I felt the chill again, sharp and sudden. Merrick watched me move around the small room, her eyes following everything, still tense, still ready to react if her daughter's breathing changed even slightly. "How did she get hurt?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence, but also because something about the wound had been bothering me since I first saw it. "She was flying low over the old battlefields," Merrick said. "Young ones do that. They think the war stories are exciting, and they go looking for pieces of it. Metal and broken machines, things to bring home and show off to their friends. She found an old shell buried in the snow. She did not know it was still armed." I felt my jaw tighten. Those old shells were supposed to have been cleared years ago. Every treaty signed after the war promised that both sides would sweep the battlefields and remove anything dangerous left behind. Clearly that promise had not been kept everywhere. There have been others, Merrick continued, watching my face carefully, as if she expected me to deny it. Hatchlings hurt the same way. Some did not survive. My people believe the humans stopped clearing the fields once the fighting ended, because there was no more reason to protect soldiers who were no longer there. That is not true, I said, though I could not be completely sure of it. Or if it is true in some places, it should not be. Nobody should still be dying from a war that ended years ago. And yet here we are, Merrick said quietly, glancing at her daughter. I thought about that for a moment, standing there in my small cabin, with the fire crackling and the snow beating against the glass. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to forget the war, trying to convince myself that closing my door and living alone meant I was finally free of it. I realized, standing there, that the war had never actually ended. It had just gone quiet for a while, hiding under the snow, waiting for a curious child to find it. I know people, I said slowly. Old contacts, people who used to coordinate cleanup crews during the ceasefire. I lost touch with most of them when I left the service, but I can find them again. I can push for another sweep of these border forests, starting with wherever your daughter found that shell. Merrick's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. You would do that? For my people? I would do it for anyone, I said. Human or Varashi. Nobody should have to bury a child because of a war that is supposed to be over. She was quiet for a long time after that, watching Vessa's chest rise and fall, slow and even now, the panic finally leaving her small body as sleep took hold. Outside, the wind began to calm, the worst of the storm passing over, leaving only a gentle fall of snow drifting past the window. When I was young, Merrick said eventually, before the war, my mother told me a story about a healer who treated anyone who came to her, no matter which side of a conflict they stood on. My people thought it was only a legend, a story meant to teach children about kindness, not something that could actually happen among real people during a real war. I did not expect to find that story sitting in a cabin at the edge of my own territory, wearing the face of a human. I am not a legend, I said. I am just a man who got tired of watching people die and decided he wanted to spend the rest of his life stopping that from happening whenever he could. That is exactly what the legend says, Merrick said, and this time there was warmth in her rough voice, something close to a smile shaping itself in a face that was not built for smiling the way human faces were. We sat together for a while after that, not saying much, both of us watching Vessa sleep. I made tea, more out of habit than anything else, and Merrick accepted a cup with careful claws, holding it in a way that made it clear she had never held anything so small and fragile in her life. She drank it slowly, watching me over the rim, and for the first time since she had broken down my door, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. I should return before sunrise, she said eventually. My people will worry if I am gone too long, and word will spread quickly if a Varashi mother is seen missing near the human border on the first night of your new year. She should not be moved yet, I said, nodding toward Vessa. Not until the swelling in that wing goes down, at least a little. If you fly with her now, you risk undoing everything I just did. Merrick looked torn, glancing between her sleeping daughter and the window, where the first pale light of dawn was beginning to touch the edge of the sky. How long? A day, I said. Maybe 2. I have room here. Nobody comes looking for me, so nobody will see her. You can rest, both of you, and when she is strong enough to travel without tearing that wing open again, I will help you get her home safely. You would let a Varashi stay in your home, she said, not quite a question, more like she was testing the words against everything she had been taught to expect from humans like me. I already did, I said. The hard part is over. The rest is just tea and firewood. She laughed again, that same rough sound from before, but longer this time, easier, some of the fear finally draining out of her. She settled down on the floor beside the table, curling her wings around herself and her daughter both, and within minutes, her breathing slowed to match the steady rhythm of Vessa's sleep. I sat by the stove for the rest of that night, watching the fire, listening to the wind finally die down outside. thinking about how strange it was that the quietest New Year's Eve I had ever planned had turned into the busiest night I had spent since leaving the war. I thought about Dren, the soldier I had pulled from that collapsed bunker 4 years ago, and how I had never known his name until tonight, and how something as small as that name had somehow found its way back to my door, wrapped around a dying child who needed exactly the skills I had spent years trying to forget I had. I thought about the shell buried in the snow, and all the others like it still hidden across those old battlefields, waiting for the next curious child, human or Varashi, to stumble across them. I decided, sitting there in the gray light before sunrise, that I was not finished with this war after all. Even if the treaties said it had ended years ago, there was still work to do, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than the tired need for silence. I felt useful again. By the time the sun fully rose over Caldron province, painting the snow outside in soft orange light, Vessa's breathing had grown stronger, her small chest rising and falling with a steadiness that told me the worst of the danger had passed. Merrick woke slowly, stretching her wings carefully in the small space of my cabin, careful not to knock anything from the shelves, and she looked at her daughter with an expression that needed no translation across any language. "Thank you," she said simply, when she finally looked at me again. "Not only for tonight, for remembering, even after everything, that kindness does not have to end when a war does. Kindness should have started before the war," I said. "We were just too busy fighting to notice." She nodded slowly, as if turning that thought over in her mind, and then she reached out one large clawed hand and rested it gently on my shoulder, careful, deliberate, the same way she had touched her daughter's side the night before. It was not a gesture I had words for either, but I understood it clearly enough. It was the beginning of something neither of us had expected to find on a quiet, snowy New Year's Eve at the edge of a border that used to mean nothing but danger. Outside, the last of the fireworks from the colony had long since faded, and the new year had arrived quietly, without anyone watching, while a human medic and a Varashi mother sat together over a sleeping child, both of them finally beginning to believe that some old wars really could end, one small act of kindness at a time.